G'day, Aisha Mahar here. What do people with codependency have to do, among many other moving pieces in recovery from codependency? Well, it is about finding more of yourself and building a stronger sense of self. So that means going back and doing some work from your childhood, family of origin, etc., so that you can, in this multifaceted, multi-layered healing and recovery process, so that you can work on integrating parts of yourself that need to be fully integrated for you to be able to identify the boundaries that you need, why you don't have them, what happened in your childhood, etc. But it's really about sense of self. Not the same as people with BPD, but there's an overlap there of some similarity, but it's not to the same extent as people with BPD. But after these cluster B relationships, when people lose themselves, even when they might not have had this self-integrated whole object part relationship to self, lacking self-esteem and lacking self-worth and having shame wounds, etc., as I've talked about, then it really becomes a journey of many moving pieces. And people really have to commit to that, engage with that, and be really hungry to resolve the issues, the multiple issues that lie between that are between why you are codependent and where you need to go to be relating in much healthier ways and having boundaries, because there is this lack of sense of self. It's not entirely a lack of self, but you are, to one degree or another, somewhat fragmented in yourself, in your awareness of yourself. Sort of like compartmentalization of feelings over here, kind of repressed, something else over here, denial, defenses, and not to the degree of, BPD or anything. But at the heart of all of this and many other issues and challenges people are going through in their life, along with codependency or people with codependency, is really the adverse childhood experience that creates these very difficult relational patterns to undo. Because the reason they came about in codependency, these unhealthy relational patterns, was for survival. So therefore they get tied back to somewhat primal defenses, maybe not as much as in BPD or NPD. Then they also get tied back to what are alloplastic defenses, which to a lesser degree than people with BPD, people with codependency are going to struggle with this idea. So people with BPD with their alloplastic defenses tend to blame everybody else for everything. But there's this alloplastic defense within codependency as well, wherein, and it stems from your childhood, wherein rather than blame everybody else for what you're feeling, how you're being hurt, what's happening, what's confusing you, what's devastating you, you'll blame yourself every single time. And then if you're with a partner, cluster B or whatever, that blames you too, as they do, that's what their alloplastic defenses are about. They're more primal defenses. They say everything is somebody else's fault. Well, codependents are there like sponges because of what you've gone through in your childhood. It doesn't have to be horrible, but it's different degrees for different people. Many people with codependency have a cluster B parent. Not everybody, but many do. So codependents on the opposite side of people with BPD, with alloplastic defenses and more primal kind of defenses, are, instead of blaming everybody, for what's going wrong, although that ends up happening for a lot of people with codependency after you get really shattered and tremendously wounded by somebody with BPD or NPD, you can start blaming a lot, and maybe not taking enough personal responsibility. But codependents notoriously take way too much responsibility for everybody else's stuff, seeking approval, wanting to be the nice guy, wanting to be the liked person at all cost, losing yourself to that. And the other thing is, so codependents tend to take on everything like it's their fault. Whereas people with BPD or narcissists, like, they're shoving it out into the world. And so really in codependency, we see, like, what I would really say is a more proper way to say this would be reverse alloplastic defenses. It's like, well, it must be my fault. I must have done something wrong. Because they're not happy. They're not approving of me. This isn't working out. And there's so many feelings that go with things that you learned in childhood that created codependency for you that were about survival, like I said. So that makes it much more core deep than people realize. So it's adverse childhood experience as well as is BPD, as is NPD, as are many things that are, quote, called mental illnesses, unquote, that are really adverse experience and extreme adverse experience in childhood that have a context that needs to be unpacked and kind of like parsed and looked at, and the pieces, so taken apart to put back together in a healthier way. This is not going to happen with somebody guaranteeing you some quick fix, some easy thing, watch a video, watch a bunch of videos, and you can heal yourself. It just doesn't work that way, like I said. So hopefully you're going to get yourself in, if you're not already, in a process with somebody who is, like myself, an expert in this and helping people to heal their codependency and what all that really does mean in a much deeper way than the fact that maybe you've been with a cluster B or you still are, etc. Because codependency is not just, as I think I said in another video, it's not just fused to cluster B. It's not fused to the relationship you're in right now, or a relationship that just devastated you, because that is a replication of something that the codependency that exists within you was there before that happened. And then you get like a double woundedness factor there. So it's really important to know that codependency is the reason, for many, why you'll get into the unhealthy bond with a cluster B often, people do. It's not the other way around. It's not that by being in that relationship, it caused your codependency. Might have made it worse, might have made you much more aware of it or something inside, right? But it's also, codependency is really a response to adverse childhood experience that really does, I don't want to say teach children, because it doesn't teach, it does the opposite. It leaves you without modeling and having been taught how to manage your emotions, how to know what you're responsible for or not, how to have the boundaries in that regard between self and other. So codependency recovery involves, becoming much more emotionally literate, raising your emotional intelligence, skills and tools, and skill building. And it's because so many people, especially after relationships with cluster B, with codependency, they're now on the dangerous psychiatric medications. You might be one person. I have many clients who are in this situation because they are suffering so much. And what I really want you to hear and understand about codependency, and the reason why it is a process of healing and recovery that you shouldn't just do with just anybody or do by yourself, is that there's so much that underpins what you've experienced in your adult relationships, whether they've been cluster B or had other issues or challenges, because people with codependency, lacking self-worth, lacking self-esteem, lacking somewhat a sense of self, lacking part of that, needing to be more fully self-integrated in a process of healing and recovery, which does take work and takes expertise on the person you're going to work with part to help guide you through that and what all that really means. So it's really important to know that codependency is really entrenched by the time that you might become aware of it because of a cluster B relationship or aware of it in some other way in your life. And many people with codependency will have substance abuse issues and struggle with that because it's a way to try to not feel the pain that you might not be wholly in touch with while you're feeling the pain. But codependency is extremely painful. And that's why in healing and recovery journeys, you really need to work with people who are expert in this area, not just showing up saying they're recovered and know all these wonderful, really exploitative guarantees and promises to you, because this is serious stuff. And this really is about you learning more about you, being healed, changing old patterns. And to do that, it's really rooting around in primal emotions. And people need to learn how to cope with that and get skills and tools and strategies, which I offer clients, in the process of doing that work of healing from codependency and or your last relationship or the on and off again relationship. So, and there is the addiction factor in codependency, relationship addiction, and the chemical soup of the reality of withdrawal. And it's very painful. And what you're experiencing with codependency is you're experiencing whatever you are in your adult relationship right now, or just did, or have, or maybe a series of adult relationships have been very painful and shattering for all different kinds of reasons, or they were all cluster B. But you have a deeper level of pain under all of that. So you can't just, so this is why people get stuck, not being able to move on from the cluster B, because it's not just all about the cluster B. It seems like it in the here and now, doesn't it? But it's not. And so it's what's come up again or come up more to your awareness from that recent relationship or relationship you're still kind of like in or out of, or you're not sure. And so it's not just that you're going to heal from that relationship. Like codependency is not so tied just to the relationship with a borderline or a narcissist. It's deeper than that. And it's from childhood. And so that's why it's so incredibly painful. And it's another reason why it's so incredibly difficult for people to go no contact, stay no contact, stop the contact, deal with false hope, endless hope that isn't really what hope is. And it's really self-defeating and really painful for so many people. So I hope that you'll find this video helpful. And the intent with it is really, if you're somebody with codependency who's not quite taking it seriously enough yet, if you think that watching anybody's videos is going to help you heal, it could give you a coping technique or tool here and there, it could give you information. But no, you have to dedicate yourself to investing in your own healing and recovery journey. And that takes time. And like I've said, it doesn't happen in 2 months or 4 months or 6 months. And especially after a cluster B relationship, or maybe you've had many challenges in your life due to what your adverse childhood experience was. Some people with not all people with codependency are the same. But I can say one thing that applies to pretty much across the board people with codependency. You are not really in touch enough with your emotions. And here comes the slippery, rather dangerous part of getting into healing and recovery. If you try to do it on your own, or you listen to somebody who's promising you everything, guaranteeing you everything through like general videos, etc. No, you need your own specific process. And what's really important about that is that you can't unfold the journey for yourself. I couldn't do it for myself years ago. I needed help with it. It's really important to reach out for help. And it's really important to know that, I have a lot of clients when I first speak to them, first couple sessions, they're like, but how does this work? But what does this really mean? People have to find their way through that. I do my best to explain it. But the best way to be healing and recovering is to be looking at what happened in your childhood, what you learned there, what isn't serving you, what hurts so much, and how to unlearn that and relearn a whole bunch of other coping tools and skills and how to get in touch with emotions. Emotional literacy is critical to recovery from codependency because people learn in childhood. There's no place in your family of origin for your feelings, or often very much not, with at least a parent, if not both. But families of origin and their dysfunction, creating codependency in many, many people as children, it's complicated. It really is complicated, and it's deep inside of you. And for you to be able to journey through that, unlearn what that's all about, the key thing is you need to really have coping tools and skills to be able to start to manage your emotions, to get in touch with your emotions, not the least of which, and more importantly, centrally, is the parts of self not integrated in wounded inner child, which might involve different age stages of an inner child. That is a lack of self-cohesion, self-integration. So you're not really able with codependency to be a whole object relational unit with yourself first, which is really important before you start to relate to the object other. This is not just terminology for people with BPD. Object relations is very informative about the way in which we actually do relate to each other. When it's going all wrong, when it's unhealthy, when it's really painful, or when it's working well, and when it has a healthy basis to it. So I hope something I said was helpful. But please know that codependency recovery and people with CPTSD, codependency, any kind of adverse, severe adverse, or adverse childhood experience, this is where this all begins. Like Pete Walker says in his book, CPTSD, that begins in early childhood too. So do things get maybe come more to your consciousness, triggered, set off more through other kinds of relationships and as you're older? Absolutely, but that's not where the difficulty starts. And if you approach it as if that's where it starts, you're not going to get to the deepest work that you need to really get into that recovered and bounded and more self-worth and self-esteem integrated you. Take care.